Part of the profession of podcasting is the risk that you take every time you interview someone. Good material has come from people who disagree, for sure. But it is my impression that the quality and the value to the listener of an interview often depends on how much the two people in the conversation are on the same wavelength of thought. And that's where the risk is, because you can go in assuming one thing and then very quickly realizing that what you thought about the other person is not necessarily true, or you misunderstood their point of view, in which case you very quickly have to adjust on the fly to still get content that people can benefit from and to still have a coherent conversation. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Jake Desyllas, who has been on the show previously in episode 34, where we talked about entrepreneurship. And that episode is one of the episodes that I've gotten really positive feedback about and that I've personally enjoyed a lot. And I think that was because of our similar perspective on the question of entrepreneurship, at least on the value and perhaps even the nobility of entrepreneurship. In today's episode, we talk about productivity. And I've listened to this episode many times as I was processing it. And it's been in the bank for about 3 or 4 months. So I've had the time. And both in the moment of recording it and in the moment of listening back to it, I've constantly been impressed, and I really, really enjoyed the whole process. And I think that is because Jake and I share a love and an excitement around personal productivity. And mine is a kind of fresh love. I'm amazed and excited and stunned by the potential that I can see for these methods to really enable us to live a life in congruence with our beliefs, to really live our values and our principles, like Jake says in this interview. Even though I haven't gotten to a very refined system or something that I used consistently and without a break, when I did it, when I used it, the results were so amazing that I am just incredibly impressed by it. Now, if you listen to Jake's love of the subject, it is a much more mature love. That is what I hear in his answers to my questions and in his opinions and in the way that he talks about it. I personally can hear this deep respect that comes from a long shared history. And there is something about the eloquence and ease with which he speaks about why this is important to him and what the potential he sees and even what the best ways are. There is a clarity there that can only come with age and experience. More specifically, time within a subject. And that is why I'm very, very happy to bring this interview to you. Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth, the podcast that empowers you to earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom through radical personal development. My name is Philip Frey, and today I'm talking to Jake Desyllas, host of the Voluntary Live podcast, as well as an early retiree. And the subject is something that many people find challenging within the field of personal productivity, and that is, how do you start? What are the first steps? Because when you look at somebody who is really well organized and they have all these systems going, and they're really solid, and it's really impressive. But then you peel back a layer and you look at the machinery behind it. It can be pretty intimidating. It's the people, and I'm sure that you've met them, who constantly take notes, and they have a full calendar, and sometimes they have 10 minutes to eat, and the things that they own are labeled, and they follow a strict morning routine, and they have their approaches to everything. And it can seem daunting. It can seem kind of alien, even if you appreciate the results that come from it. It can seem like this level of organization, this level of regimentation is only for a very specific kind of person, a kind of person that many people cannot really relate to. And even if one can, just thinking about setting up and maintaining this huge machinery of integrated productivity can be a really big challenge. The idea can be scary. It can be outside of one's self-concept, outside of what one thinks is possible for them. And it is to this feeling that I was hoping to bring an answer to bring an actionable step to, and to say, no, actually, it doesn't have to be this complicated. It doesn't have to be this refined. There are entry points that are accessible, and in many ways, taking the first step yields the greatest result. And all of the refined machinery and the apps and the charts and the graphs and the processes and everything, that is just an improvement. That is just an evolution. That is really an optional step on something that is really basic, that is within your grasp, my grasp, anybody's grasp listening to this podcast. It is possible for anybody with not as much effort as you think to really get so much more out of your time, out of your willpower, out of your limited resources. So Jake talks about a very simple, very actionable approach of setting up a bare bones productivity system. And I believe if you listen to this episode, you can go away and literally with a pen and a paper start working on it and get something going in 30 minutes, an hour, and then another 20 minutes a day, let's say. That's one thing that we talk about, but perhaps even more importantly, and I think where this interview really shines, is we talk about the why. We really go into what is the point, what is the greater purpose, what lies beyond these practices that can seem kind of pedantic, kind of anal. What is the greater goal of all this? And there is one, and Jake really, really delivers on that front. I have replayed that little bit of the interview so much, and you'll hear it if you keep listening, how much this whole philosophy goes beyond the daily tasks and getting things done and all of that, and steps into conscious living and living your philosophy. I've often found that it's really the why and the encouragement that's missing for many people. And in fact, the actual steps are secondary in nature. Most of the systems that I've developed have been influenced by, but are not copies of systems that other people recommend. And when I read a book about it, the biggest value that it can give to me is the why. And once I have the why, and once I have the self-concept that this is something that's possible for people like me, actually developing and implementing the system is not that hard and is very enjoyable, and is probably better to have your own version than to copy step by step what some person is telling you to do. Although sometimes that can have its value too. Sometimes having a little bit of hand-holding helps. So I guess it depends on one's personality. But it all starts from the why. And I think this interview really delivers on that front. So if you've been wanting to set up a personal productivity system for a while, or if you took some steps but you need some encouragement, I think this episode will really help you out. It's not an episode, it's not entertainment. It's not an episode that, I'm gonna listen to 5 podcasts today and this will be one of it. I recommend that if this is one of your goals, to take notes even. Don't listen to it on your walk or in places where it's background. Sit down and take notes and re-listen to it and really take the value out of this episode. Because if you do that, it is fully within your grasp to achieve things that you've thought previously impossible. It's been a lengthy introduction, but we haven't talked in a while, so I'm glad to have done it. And now, without further ado, here's the interview. Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth. My guest today is Jake Desyllas. He's actually a return guest. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Philip. Great to be back.
So, for those of you who haven't heard the previous interview or are not familiar with Jake, he has accomplished a lot of things. He is financially independent and he got to that point through entrepreneurship. He has written 2 very good books, Becoming an Entrepreneur and it's
Job Free,
exactly. I was just 4 Ways to Quit the Rat Race. That was on my mind, the subtitle. And he runs the Voluntary Life podcast. And whenever I look at people who've done so many great things, I always think of a system behind it, some kind of productivity or even a combination of systems. Am I correct in assuming that, Jake?
Well, I've always had a very strong interest in productivity systems. So yeah, I've definitely used many of them, and they've evolved over time as well. But I've always been very interested in productivity systems for sure.
Great. And just to give the reason for this interview up front, what I'm trying to, kind of the value that I'm trying to provide to the listener is I'd like to help people who are very early into building their productivity systems, or even kind of broader, introducing systems into their lives in general. And perhaps we can also provide some value as far as tricks and tips when it comes to kind of more advanced users. And I'd like to also encourage people, give them a little bit of a push and some excitement about systems. So that is my goal with this talk.
Right. And just out of interest, have you already spoken about your own systems, and what kind of things do you do?
Yeah, I have talked about some of my systems, and not just productivity systems. I've talked about my system when it comes to my weight management. I've talked about my budgeting to some extent, and I've talked about my way of setting and managing goals. So that's how far we've gotten into it. I've mentioned getting things done, but we've never really expanded on it.
Right. And is that, do you use any getting things done tools or anything? I'm just curious to sort of know what level you want me to start at, because I'm happy to talk about any level that you like.
Right. Yeah. So for me personally, I've read the book. I was very excited about it, but I've still it's a big undertaking to adapt it. So I'm kind of in that process, and I want to begin very soon. But when it comes to my listeners, I will go ahead and assume that they're simply at a phase where they could see the benefit from having a system, but they're not familiar with any systems or how to get there.
Cool. Okay.
So, what's your story, first of all, Jake? Were you always super organized and everything was going according to plan, or what was your learning journey with that?
I think the accurate way to put it would be I've always been very interested in productivity, and I've always been very dedicated to trying to find ways to implement systems. Whether or not everything has gone according to plan is a separate question. And no, it hasn't. And I've experienced lots and lots of bumps along the way, and systems that didn't quite work out, as well as others. But I've been interested in this for many years. I mean, even when I was back in school and university, I used to do my own type of to-do lists, basically, and ways of organizing my actions just on paper. I used to enjoy using graph paper and drawing diagrams and making my own systems like that. And then I gradually got into tools as they became available. Even the first one that I used was a Palm Pilot, which is like an ancient type of personal digital assistant tool that had some to-do lists on it and had the ability to tick things off lists and add them to different specific project lists. And then I continued to be interested in productivity systems and especially software. And when I started my own business, I became more interested in collaborative tools, because then a lot of what I was doing involved working with other people. So I really focused on collaborative task management systems and project management systems. And I actually developed a collaborative productivity tool for my business, or rather I had it developed. I got a system built for us so that we could specifically add tasks and collaborate on projects and do it in a way that we wanted to. And so for a long time, I was quite focused on the collaborative side. And for my personal tasks and for my personal productivity, I actually went back to paper for a while, and I used a paper-based system using index cards. I used to keep index cards that I would write notes on, and I would have specific cards for projects. And I then eventually read about GTD, and there started to be new tools available specifically designed for helping with GTD based productivity. And that's a whole system that we can kind of get into based on David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. But as those kind of tools became available, I got really interested in using them. And so I've been through a number of those tools. I used an app called Things for a long time, which runs on a Mac. And now I use a task management application that runs on a Mac and iOS called OmniFocus.
Right. And I think you're using a number of tools, right? When I remember you posting this graph on Facebook about how you kind of your workflow when it comes to the tools, and it's just a mind-blowing contraption of awesomeness.
Yeah, I'll send you a link if you like, and you can put that in the show notes so people know what we're talking about. But it's basically, that's a sort of way of describing for myself, really, to get clear in my own mind, the different project management tools that I use. So I use a task management application, which is really a way of organizing specific actions into projects so that you know kind of what you have to do on lots of different projects. But I also have other tools that I use. For example, I use Evernote for reference material for when I want to have a note about a project that I'm working on and keep all the relevant information. And then I use other tools, like I use a mind mapping tool for doing mind maps, which helps me to work out what is going on in my own mind to do with the project and all the things that I haven't thought of. And then finally, for more detailed project management, I actually use a process mapping application, which sort of is a way of drawing a sort of flowchart type diagram of a project so that you can work out what all the different steps are that need to happen. And from that tool, you can build a Gantt chart and actually put in deadlines and have a fully fledged project management Gantt for a project. So I don't need to do that level of detail that often, because most of the projects that I'm doing now that I'm writing and podcasting are mainly just me. But those are the different tools that I use. So, I mean, there's a lot there that we could go into, and all of them are quite complex. So I'm happy to talk about any of them. But yeah, there's definitely a lot there to discuss.
Yeah, and I mean, it might be overwhelming for people, but it looks like a very well-oiled machine. So, are you at the present at a point where, kind of in according to getting things done, you basically have every task in a system that comes up, like anything from like a big project like write the book to, I don't know, get milk? Is that all in one integrated system for you now?
Yeah, I mean, everything, and that has been for some years, for quite a long time. I mean, that's basically, I guess, to go to a more fundamental level than all these specific tools, the basic idea that really, really stuck with me and that makes a huge amount of sense is just to get everything out of your head and write it down. Even if that just means that you're writing it down on paper, one of the most fundamental steps to any productivity system is to get things out of your head. So that includes ideas I might have about projects I might do someday maybe, and it includes the tasks that I have on as you say, writing a book, and it includes errands like getting the milk or whatever. And you know, where I put those things varies depending on the kind of action or bit of information that it is. So there's a lot of detail that we could talk about in terms of, you know, I mean, I have a reminders list on my phone for things like errands, like getting milk, which is different from where I put projects like writing a book. But the fundamental principle is get everything out of your head and get it written down. And that is such a key part of my productivity system and any successful productivity system. There's really 3 steps. There's that first step, which is that you've got to get everything out of your head and write it down, even if it's just on paper. And then the second step is you have to review it regularly. You have to find a way to look at what you've written down, so that rather than just writing down some great idea in a notebook that goes on your shelf and you forget all about it, you have some regular way of reviewing the stuff that gets out of your head so that you know what it is that you're working on, and then you can change and adjust, you know, your list of to-do items or whatever way that you have working. So that's the second step, is reviewing. And the third step is really finding a way to organize this in a system that you trust. And that means that when you write things down, you know you're going to come back and look at it. You know you're going to see it when you need to. You know you're going to have the information to hand whenever you need it. And so you've always got to make sure that you only adopt tools when you feel comfortable that you're going to trust them. Like, there's no point in getting a really all singing, all dancing project management system in place if you don't really use it and you don't really trust that you're going to look at it and so forth. So those are the 3 kind of fundamental principles that whatever system I'm using, and it's changed over the years, that's what I've been trying to do. I've been always trying to find ways of getting stuff out of my head, ways of reviewing it regularly so that I keep it up to date, and also building it into a system that I trust so that I know if I write something down in this place, that's the right place for it. I know I'm going to see it again when I need to. And those fundamental 3 principles are really what I would suggest for people who want to build their own system. You can do that even if you just start with paper. You can really make, just as long as you stick to those getting those 3 fundamentals in place, then you know you'll be so far ahead of anyone using a tool and not really using it properly, as long as you stick to those 3 principles.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent overview, and yeah, indeed, you can. I agree with you. I think you can even, if you just want to make a simple step towards it, you don't need to read a lot of books or buy tools or download them or learn to use them. Basically, you're already listening to this episode, so you're covered on that front. And just take this advice and implement it to perhaps the most critical area of your life, and kind of go from there. Yeah,
it's going to make so much more difference to get a system up and running that you actually use and that you do write things down in, and that you do review regularly, and that you do trust, as opposed to getting a system that's, capable of doing so much more up and running that you only half trust or half use. It'll really put you way far ahead if you're just comfortable with what you're doing and you make it your own. You take ownership over it so that you really trust it.
Yeah, and let's talk about the benefits, why this is worth doing. So in getting things done, I think the subtitle is, or at least kind of a catchphrase is, stress-free productivity. And the reason why the author David Allen claims that is what you can achieve is that he says when you don't have things written down or kind of put into a system, you're basically constantly recycling the things you have to do. So if it's not written down anywhere, it's written down somewhere where you don't have access or don't review it regularly. You kind of have to constantly cycle the list of 20, 30, 50, whatever number of tasks in your head. Like, oh yeah, I got to do this. Oh yeah, I got to do that. And because of that, you can never really be present in the moment and just focus on what you're doing right now and just be able to not worry about anything else because you have a system covering your back. That is the theory. So I'm curious, as you've implemented this, and I'm guessing you've become more proficient as time went on, was this your experience, and how have these systems changed your life and your level of stress?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a vital part of how I manage stress and how I just organize my whole life, really. It's that integral into the way that I approach things. How has it changed things? Well, I mean, I think what's relevant, especially for your podcast, because your podcast is about personal development, that this is how I organize my thinking. This is how I communicate with myself about things like, what do I want to get out of life? What am I trying to do? How is it going? How am I going to balance different objectives that I have, where I want to do, two different things that are not, that are mutually exclusive? How do I balance those different things that I want to achieve against each other? Where am I lacking integrity? Where have I got aspects of my life that are working really well, and where I'm applying my principles, and other aspects of my life where there's an opportunity for me to, to actually improve on being consistent about applying the principles that I use in my life. So this is my way of organizing my own mind and using tools to get stuff out of my head so that I can actually have a more conscious life and live more consciously, and therefore be better able to make my own decisions and my own choices that I have made consciously, rather than choices that just were the sort of default option because I procrastinated for too long and, couldn't do anything else, if you see what I mean. This is how I actually make my life as voluntary as possible, and make it most directed by what I want and most towards my own purpose in life. So it's that important to me that I consider it to be very much integral to the way that I achieve a more conscious way of living. Yeah,
that's beautifully put. So it's not just about getting things done or, like the daily things, but it's basically, it ensures that you're living your philosophy. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is the funny thing, is that a lot of the stuff to do with productivity systems is about really trivial stuff. Like you mentioned before, remembering that you need to buy milk or something like that. It's about this really trivial stuff. So it can feel, when you're thinking about these systems, how am I going to remember which errands I need to run? And that kind of question, it can feel like you're dealing with trivial matters, and not your highest purpose in life. But the way to think about it is that when you don't deal with all of that trivial stuff, you just carry it around in your head, and it just clutters up your brain, your mind, so that you're not able to think about those higher purposes that you have in life. And so what you're doing is getting that stuff out of your head so that you free up your creativity in order to achieve the things that are truly meaningful to you. And in that way, it's like all of these little tasks that you've got, all these little responsibilities are like baggage that you're carrying. And it's all in your head, it's as if you have a backpack with just loads of stuff in it, all of this trivial stuff, and you're trying to run with carrying all of this stuff with you. In the same way, when you try and remember that you need to buy milk and you need to do this, that, and the other, and you've got to phone this guy and all of these other little things that you haven't got a system for, that's all clutter. That's all baggage that's cluttering up your mind. And you don't have the mental resources to think as freely and creatively as you could do if you didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. You know, if you have a system in place, then once you've written that stuff down and put it in your system, you can just forget about it and you can get on with being creative and with thinking about the things that truly matter to you and focusing on stuff that, you know, is actually going to bring meaning to your life rather than having to spend all the time, you know, trying to remember stuff. So it's the irony of that system. And David Allen has written about this, that the irony is, you know, you think deeply about these trivial things in order to get them out of your mind so that you can actually free up your mind to get on with the stuff that really matters in life.
Yeah, that is, that's very interesting and kind of, it's counterintuitive in the beginning. Yeah. It's really counterintuitive that, by getting these really boring and trivial and kind of uninteresting things under control and well organized, that is what actually unlocks things like the motto of Valiant growth is earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom. But to get there, you must first make sure that the milk is coming in and the bills are paid and you did call that guy. And only when your mind is free of that can you really focus on these higher goals.
Yeah, absolutely. The goal, I think, has to be in order to really be able to work on those great things that you just mentioned. The goal has to be really capable at life, to be able to just get things done really effectively so that you're not spending your days struggling with, you know, trying to remember where you put that letter about the gas bill and, you know, what you're going to do about your 2 appointments that you booked next week that you've forgotten what time they were. You know, that's really what it's about. Get that stuff out of your head so that you can focus on the personal development things that your podcast is all about. And I do firmly believe that you can't really develop yourself and your own personality, your own choices, unless you do get these basics of just handling life under control, because otherwise they will always overwhelm you and you just won't have the mental resources to work on the higher things.
Right. Well, I think we did a great job selling this idea to people. So, just out of curiosity, if you can make an estimate, if you couldn't use any of these systems, so if you had to keep everything in your head, let's assume we're going back to the days where you were running your business, because I think now you have a little bit more flexibility, but then I'm assuming it was a little bit more packed. What percentage of your productivity do you think you would lose, roughly, if you couldn't have any kind of system like this? How much would that impair you?
I mean, that question is so, that's a bit like saying, how productive would you be if we didn't have the internet or if we didn't have personal computers?
Yes.
It's like, I kind of think like, whoa, I don't know. That would be a real step change. So I can't estimate it, but it would be huge. And obviously, it depends what I had. In the absence of any systems, we are just talking about managing things inside my own head, which would mean I'd be reliant on my own memory and on just sort of basically remembering stuff. And frankly, my memory's not that great. And you know, I don't have the benefit of what is it called? Eidetic memory. I think some people who can just remember vast quantities of useless information.
Oh yeah, kind of photographic memory.
Yeah, yeah. But Yeah, I have no idea, but it's literally the same order of magnitude of saying, like, what would it be like running a business with no computers or with no internet?
Right. Yeah, and that was my personal experience as well. I've I've only I've only implemented little bits of these ideas. So I'm not yet all the way, and I don't always run these systems. So sometimes I have to stop. But even just working on it a little bit moved me from. Again, I kind of I couldn't answer my own question here. Like, I couldn't say a percentage, but practically it moved me from making something really creative or cool or interesting once every few months. It moved me from that to being kind of an accidental thing to doing it to the point where I was making five I believe quality episodes a week, plus having a job. So that was kind of the difference in my life.
I think if you, just thinking more about your question, if I had a life where I really just did one thing, like let's say I was a musician and I just played guitar all day or something, and that was both my job and my passion and everything else, then you can still get into flow and you can still really enjoy doing one thing, but you're still going to have to get the milk and you're still going to have to do all those other things to just keep yourself going. And not only that, we all have way more responsibilities than just one thing. We all have relationships with other people. That's a responsibility. We have our personal finances. That's another one. We've got our health to think about. We've got our social lives. We have jobs. We have responsibilities at work. There are side projects that we want to do. There are future plans that we want to achieve. So you pile all of those things together, and then you need a way to organize all of that stuff. And that's really where productivity systems of getting things out of your head come into play.
Right. Okay, so thinking from somebody's perspective who is new to this, I think one of the kind of the biggest obstacles is that it sounds very high maintenance. And honestly, it probably is pretty high maintenance until you build some skill in managing it. So I'm assuming for you at this point it's pretty smooth, but for someone beginning with it, or even myself who have a limited experience with it, it does take willpower, and it does take some time to run these systems. So where would you begin? Where would you begin if you were new to this world, or what kind of advice would you give someone who was just starting out with this, and maybe they don't have a history of being very organized, and perhaps they don't have a self-concept of being a person who's very organized, and they have a limited willpower to put into this? What would you advise them to do? Just really, really practically, how could they begin exploring this world and implementing this?
Well, I would say that if you really aren't doing anything, then I would just start on paper. That's actually how I started. And I would come back to saying that, the thing about getting things done, David Allen's book and many of the other books, is that I think what's daunting for people is that they're big, complicated workflows and ideas about organizing stuff. And what happens, I think, is people start reading it and they sort of pick up on some of these habits that you're supposed to use and these different ideas. And then it just becomes a bit overwhelming because it's just way too much to take on board. And that is one of the difficulties, especially with the getting things done approach, is that there's a lot of new habits to start if you want to take this stuff on board. And I think something that can happen for some people is that it just feels a bit alien, and it feels like something that is going to take a lot of willpower and a lot of effort for them to actually sort of take on. I would suggest that the best way to start is to start with stuff that you're going to feel a real sense of efficacy and control in using. And so, for example, paper is very simple. It's very straightforward. If you literally start by having a notebook and by organizing that notebook, even if you just organize it with a series of different to-do lists for your errands you have to run, whatever particular projects are of interest to you, your work or whatever, if you just start writing stuff down in that on a regular basis, whenever something occurs to you that you need to remember, you write it all down in that notebook, and then you get yourself to review that notebook regularly, and you keep looking at it on a regular basis. For example, in a weekly review is one of the habits. It's a very simple thing to kind of get your head around. It's once a week you're going to look through everything you've written, make sure there's nothing that you've forgotten, and make sure that you're on top of everything. And then keep going with that system so that you trust it, so that you know that if there's something you need to remember, then you'll write it down. Then what you can do is start with that and gradually make your system more efficient when you're ready to do so. So for example, if you start finding that you have a very clear system of different tasks lists for different projects, then you can look at a simple piece of software that's going to replicate that system that you're doing in paper and make it easier for you to update it rather than having to write things out. You know, you can just do it all on your phone or on your laptop or whatever. But I think the key is you've got to be able to feel ownership of your system. You have to be really, really tenacious with this, because if you just do it in a way that you think, oh yeah, okay, good, I'm going to get organized, I'll write some things down, and that's, you know, maybe I should probably do that again sometime, then it's not going to work. It's the same way that if you want to start exercising, thinking, oh, I should probably get fit, I guess I should do some exercise, yeah, I'm gonna start doing that sometime, that's never going to work. But even if you just start with some regular habit that you are able to do on a predictable, reliable basis, that you know that every morning you're going to do this one small piece of exercise, or once a week you're going to do this piece of exercise, then, you know, you actually have some sense of ownership of it and you can start the process. And in a way, everything that I do now, all of the software that I'm using, it's all just a much more efficient and way of achieving what you can do in paper anyway. So that would be my suggestion for people who really are just starting. Start with your own system and start with one that you trust because you develop it yourself. And if you find as you're doing it, you're constantly reviewing it, you can make it more efficient by deciding, oh, you know what? Rather than just having one to-do list, I'm going to break it up in this way. I'm going to have these 3 pages. Or rather than putting all my notes in, in this form, I'm going to start, I don't know, putting a little box around certain words that I need to remember. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You decide for yourself. But if you trust that system, then you can evolve it as you go. But the key thing is you will have a system in place. And having a system, even if it's a rather cumbersome one and one that is, not very efficient, just having a system is far more effective than half implementing 10 different, super systems.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with that. And indeed, I think getting things done can be, I might even go as far as saying that I don't recommend reading it before you start doing something like, something like Jake said here, something like you said, because there are things there that are really, big hurdles. It's things like he says, okay, so collect all your possessions and label them and organize them and have an in tray and write down absolutely everything that is in your head and make a project list. And that's and he actually says that when he does it with clients, this takes days or a day at least. So that can be intimidating. But yeah, just starting with a notebook is great.
If you have your own system and you start encountering little points of friction in your system, like you start thinking, I really want to be able to get down my ideas for interesting new projects, but I don't want to clutter up my to-do list because they're not really to items. And you start thinking about these different questions for yourself. How could I organize this notebook more effectively for myself? And you start evolving your system. Like I said, I started off with on paper, and eventually I decided to use index cards, partly because that meant that I could easily swap out, ones that I'd finished with and include like different new cards with different information together. And once you start to do that, then when you read Getting Things Done, you'll be reading it from the perspective of how could this improve my system? How can I use and steal some of these ideas from David Allen to improve my own system? How can I actually take away things from his book that I can use, rather than starting from the position where you're saying, well, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to let David Allen tell me exactly, how to run everything, because you'll never really feel ownership in the same way.
Yeah. And when you get there, then it becomes a really, really, really valuable tool. I kind of read it in a position like that. I had the system going, and then you read it, and it's mind-blowingly brilliant, to be honest, or at least that was my impression. Some of the ideas and the tools and kind of the philosophy of it is really, it gives a kick to your own system, like a big boost to your own system. I just wanted to, like, personal anecdote that my first introduction to the world of productivity systems was at kind of my first full-time serious job, where I would spend a lot of time, like, the boss would talk to me once a week or twice a week, and I was doing marketing, so he'd give me a list of things to do, and he was always upset because I showed up to these meetings kind of empty-handed and like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And he said, okay, Philip, next time you come to me, please bring a notebook and just write things down. And I remember I was kind of defensive about that. Like, is this guy questioning my memory? But then I realized that, yeah, it helped. And the way I did it, I simply took notes. And if it was a task, I put a little star next to it. And that was it. And that alone helped a lot at that job. But it's much better to do it at your own initiative than to kind of have someone make you do it.
Yeah. I mean, if you really take an interest in this and get enthusiastic about building this for yourself and for the benefits that it gives you, then you are going to end up being more organized than your boss. And that is a very, very powerful thing in your career, to be the most organized person in those type of meetings. It will definitely get noticed, and you'll make a really good impression. So do it for yourself, and ultimately, it will help in work as well.
Yeah, I had this idea. I'm no longer in Romania, and I'm no longer in contact with that company. But this was, I think, 2 years ago. But I was thinking, yeah, with kind of even with the task management system that I have now, which it's not perfect, and I can't always maintain it. But even with this, if I went back to this guy, I could easily say, okay, give me 2 weeks to show you where I got as far as productivity goes, and then we'll talk about doubling or tripling my salary, because I think I would genuinely be able to provide the value for that, simply because of better organization.
Right.
So, Jake, do you have times when you have trouble maintaining your system, staying up to date? It could be productivity, but it could be other things like a budget as well, or whatever other systems you have going on. So do you have cycles when you have trouble maintaining them, and how do you handle that?
I used to have this a lot more when I was working on a lot of very intensive deadlines, running my business. Just because I took on more stuff than I could do, basically. And no system ultimately is going to really help you to be able to actually do way more than you can physically do. So I definitely have experienced just, for example, having really big projects with big deadlines. I used to have times when I couldn't do weekly reviews. I couldn't look at I couldn't keep track of stuff, especially in my personal life, because I was so focused on getting things finished for work. And, now that I have sold my business, I have a much better balance about all the different aspects of my life, and I'm able to focus much more on the things that, that I want to. So I don't have that kind of overwhelm nearly so much. But there are things that, I still realize ways of improving my system as time goes on. And I also still find that certain things get harder. So for example, this year we've had quite a lot of upheaval because last summer we moved to Panama, and then because we're going to have a baby and the Zika virus was a potential risk for us, we actually had to change plans and come back to the UK. And so during that whole period, I have also, as part of my general productivity systems, I have ways of sort of just keeping all my different parts of life going. And part of that is my morning routine. And it's a very important part of my own productivity to be able to, in the morning, go through and look at all of my tasks and to do some journaling and various other things too. And that, when you're doing a lot of traveling, and also I got ill for a while, and lots and lots of stuff was going on, it's very hard to keep that routine going. So it's been this year I've had to sort of use significant willpower and concentration to sort of make sure that I get back on track. So yeah, and I still, over the years, there's lots of different things that I have learned to improve. So for example, I'm very careful about what I put as deadlines in my own task management system. It's very easy to decide for yourself with tasks, oh yeah, I'm going to get this done by this date, and to give it a deadline. And, with any of these task management applications, they can show you all the tasks that are overdue. And the danger with that is that you start giving yourself all these deadlines, and then you start seeing all these overdue tasks. And it's not really helpful, because then you start ignoring the fact that they're overdue. So I have learned over time to treat the idea of a due date and a deadline as something that I only use when there really is a due date, i.e. when I have an external constraint that I must get something finished by this time in order for other things to happen, or because I have made a commitment to other people, or whatever it is. But when I just want to do things for myself, I have a plan to do those things, but I don't use that kind of feature of my task management system, because otherwise I just end up piling on the due dates for myself, and it doesn't actually mean anything. There's lots of little tweaks like that I've learned over the years too.
Right. I really like that idea. And I just think that's really smart. Because it's both kind of the practical aspect of differentiating between what is. So if you have a deadline for everything, it becomes hard to look at your system and really see like, okay, what is truly a kind of a time-bound priority and what isn't, if you have all of these.
Exactly. And you can do things like in some systems you can have a distinction between items that you flag and items that have a deadline. And that way you can show there are certain things, okay, these are things that I want to see today, but these are the things that are actually deadlines that I need to do. So there are ways of managing that. But there's other things, like another thing just to mention, that because it comes to mind, you asking about stuff that I've learned. One of the things about getting things done is that it's very much a system that is designed for overworked information workers. It's basically designed for people working at computers with lots of different projects, having to basically define their own tasks quite a lot, and rushing from meeting to meeting. And so a lot of getting things done is about, what do you do if you were going to go to a meeting, but you're having to wait for half an hour and you just got this half an hour of dead time? Well, here's what you can do. You can open your list of phone calls and you can just get a whole bunch of phone calls done, because they're all there for different projects, or alternatively, you can have a different list of actions. Getting things done is sort of a system that's really designed to get you to be able to use your time flexibly and deal with changing external circumstances. But what it's not very good at is actually helping you focus and helping you to really define what you're going to spend your time working on when it's fully your choice. You know, so for example, now I've sold my business. It's up to me what I do with my time. And that's a different type of question, because it's like, okay, well, how do I want to prioritize my day? How do I want to spend my time? And what do I really want to get done? And a lot of people, especially people who have achieved financial independence and stuff, that's one of the things they don't really know what they're going to do, you know, how they're going to spend their day. And like I've spoken to some people who say, well, if they were able to quit their work, then they would probably do a university course or something, because it would give them something to do. It would give them structure, because they're worried that otherwise they just waste their time. I don't want to do that, because I want to determine my own time, and there's no university course that I particularly feel like doing. But consequently, I've had to think more, rather than the GTD style of, okay, let me make sure that I'm prepared for any eventuality and that I can always use dead time. I've had to think more about prioritizing and choosing how to focus. And so, for example, I now very much choose which projects I focus on for a long period of time. Like over the next couple of weeks, I'm only going to work on this project, apart from all of the little side tasks that need to get done. Because otherwise there is a danger with GTD that you can end up thinking that you're working on 20 projects at once. And actually you just don't really get that focused attention to what it is that's most important to you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I wish we could we could have a full discussion just on this subject alone, because knowing my listenership, there are people who are in this kind of office type information worker type of world where GTD is really what's going to benefit them greatly. But there are other people, myself included, where they're either financially independent like you, or in my case is that I work a part-time job, and I live frugally on it, and it's a kind of job where you exit the door and you can forget about it. So after that, I have self-leadership when it comes to my own time.
And you want to use that time to the maximum level of fulfillment that you can.
Exactly.
Right.
But how do you do that? I think that's a very interesting question. And
well, my suggestion to you would be that having just characterized GTD in that way, I'm not saying it won't be useful for you as well. Like, I think the best way is to take what you can from getting things done, because you are still going to need to buy milk and do all of those other things. And so you do need to manage all of the sort of just general trivial stuff that comes into life. Take what you can from that, but also look at other approaches and other ways of sort of focusing your time. I did a review recently of a book called The Power of Less. And that one is very much more about habits and about focus. And I think it has some limitations, but as a balancing book, I think it's quite a good complement to getting things done, because it's a very different approach. And in a way, you know, you want to kind of take the best from all of these different approaches.
Yeah. So it's called The Power of Less. Yes.
By Leo Babauta, The Power of Less.
Okay, so I will link to that. So if you go to valiantgrowth.com/power of less, then you will find the book on Amazon. And also Getting Things Done, you can find it at valiantgrowth.com/GTD. Thank you for that recommendation. I will definitely look into it.
No problem.
So as we move into kind of the final phase of this interview, I want to ask you about kind of the bigger picture goal management. And in kind of, I think in orthodox getting things done, there is a perspective that if you get your ground level, and we've also talked about this today, that if you get your ground level things organized, purpose and bigger picture goals will kind of emerge more naturally. But I'm curious how you look at like really long term and big picture goal. What is your system for so what is your system for defining them, reviewing them, and how do you know if they are in alignment with your values? How do you make sure that they're accurate?
That is a great question, and it's a big topic. So I will try and give a kind of overview, but to be honest, that's a very big subject.
It is.
Essentially, so how do I think about long-term goals, and how do I know if they're in alignment with my values or purpose? So that's what you're asking, yeah?
Yes.
So in very broad terms, I find it really helpful to look at each aspect of my life as a different sort of aspect, an area of responsibility or an area of focus. And that's a technique that comes from getting things done. And I find it really helpful. And I define all of those in terms of the different aspects of my life. And I'm not just talking about work. I am talking about all aspects. So for example, I'm talking about things like my relationship with my wife, my finances, my friends, my health, traveling, and all of the podcasts that I run, the books that I write. These are all different sort of areas of responsibility within my life. And I find it really useful to look at all these different areas, to name them for myself so that I can think about, okay, what are all of the significant areas of responsibility that I have, the ones that are meaningful to me, the ones that actually impact on my day-to-day sense of purpose and happiness and just generally impact on my life. So I name them all and I review them regularly to look at what projects have I got going on in this area of my life. Are there any projects that I'm missing, and what are my goals for this area of my life? So you asked about how I manage goals. So I do look at each of these areas of my life and I outline all the goals that I have for that area of my life. What are my goals in terms of my personal finance? What are my goals in terms of my podcast? What are my goals in terms of the books that I'm writing and so forth? And then I go through a process where I look through all of those goals, and each year I just pick 3 of those goals that are the most significant ones. And I'm talking about big goals here. I'm not talking about, just, I want to fix some little tweak on my podcast or something. I'm talking about a goal like writing a book. Like, that's a big goal. And I pick 3 goals like that for the year. And those are the ones that I really focus on. But I do know what all of the other minor goals are. And, if there's an opportunity to get things done as well, I will do it. But those are the ones that I really focus on. So that's the kind of process that I go through in terms of goals. But with regard to the higher than that level, within each area that I mentioned, these areas of responsibility, I also go through a process of doing basically a vision board for each of those aspects of my life. And that means that when I look at my friendships, or I look at my health, or travel, or my personal finances, my relationship with my wife, any of these types of areas, and there are many other ones as well, or a few other ones, I go through and I create a vision board where I basically take a piece of paper and I just draw and do little diagrams or words or arrows or whatever makes sense to me on that page as to what I envisage as the most epic, awesome, wonderful way that I want my life to go towards in that area. When I think about travel, what am I really longing to do? What would be the most awesome way forward? When I think about my personal finances, what is it that I'm working towards? What is my vision? And the key thing about that vision is that I write down the things that I don't yet know how to do. I write down on those vision boards the stuff that isn't like a goal for this year. It's stuff that is more far-reaching. It's more stuff that I will really have to fill in the gaps between where I am now and where I want to get to. A vision in that sense is something like, I want to achieve financial independence, or I want to start a business, or I want to sell my business. Those are the kinds of visions that I'm talking about for that level. And what I find is that by doing that, that gives me my creative imagination something to work towards. Because then I find myself thinking, when I'm going for a walk or something, like, how on earth would I do that? For example, how could I sell my business? How would it work? What would I need to get in place? What would need to happen? And so forth. And that gets my creative process going. And it means that I can gradually transform that vision into concrete projects that I can then use to get step by step closer towards my vision. And, that process is really how I work towards having big dreams, dreaming big and making them happen. And I think this is something that people can be afraid to do when they think that it's just, laughably impractical to write down that you want to do some so grand thing when you have no clue how to get there. But actually, that's the whole point about visioning, is that you do write down stuff that you have no clue how to get there, and you do it consciously. You allow yourself consciously to do that, because then you let your creative imagination start filling in the gaps and working out how on earth you're going to get there.
Right. And that's very interesting to me, because if I understand this correctly, in this you're kind of skipping an element that I see in many kind of goal management systems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so the way I see it is you have these visions that you define, and you go from what is important to you, and then when you define them, you kind of let them grow and feed you over time the projects that you put into your kind of day-to-day system. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there's a layer in goal management that I saw where you have these kind of, you go from, okay, you set the vision, but right there in the same moment, or kind of in the same process, you also, okay, let's turn this into a SMART goal. Let's make big milestones. Let's do things like that. And you kind of do that separately from your day-to-day system, and you kind of try to integrate it. But the way I see your approach, it's much more organic, much more natural approach. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is a step between visioning and the day-to-day projects that, I mean, for example, let's take any of those ones that I just mentioned, like selling my business or something like that. There may be day-to-day projects that I can immediately start. Like, okay, I'm going to set up a project which is research selling a business, find out about possible buyers in my industry. I can do that tomorrow, right? I can start learning about that. So that can immediately, there can be day-to-day projects that could just organically spring up, because it's like, oh, okay, I've now recognized this dream. I've now recognized this goal. So what can I do about it? Is there stuff that I can start doing? Yeah, that could immediately set off a whole number of day-to-day projects. But it may also be that what it does is it informs my goals for that area of my life. So if it's like, okay, then there's that more like a year ahead type focus that I was telling you about, which is where do I want to take this aspect of my life? In this case, it'd be my business in the next couple of years. And then I'd be thinking, well, if I'm going to be looking towards selling my business, then first of all, we really have to get another, good 2 years of profitability. So what am I going to do to make sure that the next 2 years are highly profitable? And so that's where it could start filtering down. But yeah, the answer is it can be very organic then. Once you have recognized your vision, recognized your dream, and once you have allowed yourself to write it down and allowed yourself to have that dream, then your imagination is free to start working on it. The place that a lot of people stop is that they don't actually allow themselves to write that stuff down. And then it's just a pipe dream, something that you only think about, when you're in the shower and oh, wouldn't it be nice one day if ... Then you haven't really had that dream. That's just something that is a nice thought to fleetingly have. When you write it down and you start working towards it, then you're giving yourself permission to actually go for it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is indeed very, there's an immense return on investment. Just like the few hours that it will take you, at least in my experience, to really work on visions and kind of really think of them systematically, there'll be a very rich return there. So Jake, do you have, I will ask you to, if you have, I'm guessing you have episodes on these topics, so I will link to them if you'll send me the links.
Sure. Yes.
But I hope to continue this discussion because I think there are things to explore. But yeah, that's the limit for today. Where can people find you?
Thank you. They can find me at thevoluntarylife.com. And I have done episodes about, lots of different aspects of what we talked about in terms of productivity, both in terms of general productivity systems and also visions and the process of identifying them and stuff. So yeah, I'll give you some links, Philip, and we can put those in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what about your books? I highly recommend them. But again, what are the titles and where can people find them?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, they are Becoming an Entrepreneur and Job Free. And you can find them both on Amazon under my name, Jake Desyllas. But you can also just find them at thevoluntarylife.com and click on the tab marked books, and then you'll find links to them there.
And there's also an audiobook version of Job Free, right?
Yes, there's audiobook versions of both of them. They're now both in print and ebook and audio.
Yeah, and you've recently released the introduction to Job Free in your podcast, which, you can see what kind of book it is, and it's Jake reading it, so you can see if you if you enjoy his style.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you for coming on Valiant Growth, Jake, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you too, Philip. Thanks very much.